Hello and welcome to our Lakeside chat. We are David Wofford and Katie Noonan, co-chairs of the Rotary Nature Center Friends. And we're so happy that you can join us tonight.
As we begin our program tonight, it's important for us to acknowledge that we are on stolen land, that Lake Merritt is part of Ohlone territory. We hear now from Corrina Gould, spokesperson for the Confederated Villages of Lishan and co-founder of Segura Te Land Trust.
Good afternoon, relatives. My name is Karina Gould. I am the spokesperson for the Confederated Villages of Lishan. We are here today at what most folks think of as Lake Merritt. We are in the territory of Huichin. Huichin is actually a territory that encompasses 6 Bay Area cities: Oakland, Berkeley, Alameda, Emeryville, Albany, and Piedmont. And so this is a place that my ancestors have been since the beginning of time. And this was a place of abundance. I'm so happy that people from all walks of life that now come into our territory can enjoy this beautiful place that my ancestors have enjoyed since the beginning of time. My relationship to the land that I have been born to, raising my children and grandchildren here, has been to tell the story, the truth of what happened on this land before other people came here. I'm hoping that as we begin to learn these lessons of fires in California, the pandemic that's happening, that human beings come back to living in reciprocity with the earth.
Hello.
Thank you, Karina, for that inspiring words always. And as we move forward in our national and global life, they are ever more meaningful. Really appreciate the insights that the Ohlone people are sharing with us now and in the future. So thank you. Rotary Nature Center Friends would like to note with sadness the passing of an important person in our community. In the past month, Carl Anthony passed away, and we wanted to share some of our thoughts and express our deep admiration and thanks for his life, devoted to greater understanding of social justice, our common home, the earth, and the human condition, which continues on. We want to say rest in power, Carl, and our thoughts are with you, your family, your wide community of students and activists that are still leading on with your work. Rotary Nature Center Friends hosted Carl Anthony and Dr. Paloma Pavel on Lakeside Chats in 2021. I'd like to share in remembrance, especially moving portion of this program, which they shared with us. Thank you, everyone. We will be sharing more information in our post Lakeside Chat email that we send out with links about Carl's work and how you can hook up with his books and see what his organization, the Earth House Center in Oakland, is currently doing their activist programs that they have going today. So thank you so much. With that, we would like to introduce our speaker. And so we're very privileged and we're excited to have with us Dr. Christina Fall from Mills College. Dr. Fall is an environmental scientist. She got her degree in Earth, Atmospheric, and Planetary Sciences from MIT and a PhD in Earth Sciences from the University of California at Santa Cruz. She has been a professor at Mills College for quite a while, providing and applying chemical techniques to study the interaction of nutrients, trace elements, and metals and carbon with climate change in a range of settings in urban watersheds like our own. And an important part of her teaching and research is to provide research opportunities for undergraduates so that they can continue to learn more in the future. And so we're so happy that you're here with us tonight, Christina. Thank you very much. And
so I just wanted to first start by saying thank you so much to Katie and then to everyone else at the Rotary Nature Center Friends for the opportunity to speak to you today. I'm really excited to be here. I'll be talking to you about some research that I've done and am doing with a colleague of mine, Laura Rademacher from the University of the Pacific, and also Maria Elena Ramos, who was a student at Mills College and is now at St. Mary's College. And though I won't be talking about Lake Merritt today, I will be discussing another water body in Oakland that I think exemplifies some of the challenges that Lake Merritt faces and that a lot of other San Francisco Bay Area watershed lake or estuary pairs share that are located at the land-sea interface. So I would like to, before I get started, just acknowledge the Ohlone people. Mills College at Northeastern University in Oakland occupies the unceded land of the Ohlone people, and we thank them for their continued stewardship. So I'd like to start by asking the question, how might the Lake Aliso Lion Creek watershed offer some insights into challenges that are also faced by Lake Merritt? Well, they have some things in common. For one thing, they are both located in the park-like setting in Oakland. You can see on the screen here on the upper right, there is a picture of Lake Aliso taken about the 1920s on the Mills College campus. And they're both influenced by runoff and stream water that they receive from the surrounding urban area. If you look on the bottom, there's a map of Oakland's creeks, and you can see Lake Merritt. And then if you count a few watersheds over to the southeast, you'll see the Lion Creek watershed, and you'll see a little bit of a bump on the Lion Creek when it's daylighted near the confluence of Highway 13 and 580. That's Lake Aliso. It's located on the Mills College campus, or now Northeastern Oakland campus. And these are both sites of cultural, educational endeavors, and they both have connections to the bay. So Lake Merritt is obviously directly connected to the bay, but Lake Aliso is connected to the bay too, because its outlet, Lion Creek, flows to the San Francisco Bay. I'd also just like to point out that occasionally we also call Lion Creek Leona Creek, although strictly speaking, Leona Creek is a tributary to Lion Creek. But sometimes we also refer to it as Leona Creek as well, and you may have heard that around town a bit. So I'd like to start with talking about some of our motivations that we had for starting this study. So it turns out that collectively, runoff from a lot of small watersheds can have a big impact on San Francisco Bay. And in fact, it's possible that the runoff contributes greater than 80% of the load to the coastal ocean. So because there are so many of these little watersheds around the bay, maybe 200 plus reservoir watershed pairs around the bay, these may have an impact on San Francisco Bay water quality and ecosystem health. And we know also that the Bay has experienced a lot of challenges with the urbanization and growth over the last 150 years or so of the time since Europeans came to the Bay Area. So we know there's an impact from that urbanization as well. Another motivation we had is to look into what effect does climate change and drought have on these watersheds and intermittent streams. You can see here, these are pictures of drought over the 10-year period from approximately 2010 to 2020. And our study covers this time period. And, you know, over the last 15 years or so in Northern California, we've been in official drought, you know, at least 2/3 of the time. So it's really a big impactor on these watersheds and will be only more so in the future. Finally, we also had an educational motivation for this study. So we're really interested in getting undergraduates excited about research by focusing on a place-based, people-centered, solution-oriented question. And lots of students at Mills and now at Northeastern Oakland campus are really interested in understanding their local environment and the impact that they can have on that. So it turns out also that early engagement in research promotes self-efficacy for all students, and that meaningful and beneficial relationships that they develop with faculty members can aid to a sense of belonging and persistence in science. So the pictures across the top here show you some of my research teams from both Mills College and from Northeastern University, Oakland as well. And then you can also see a picture of Leona Creek flowing through the campus. That picture is from quite a while now, but we called that the Day of the Orange Creek. So more about that in a minute. So we had several goals in our study. The first goal of our study was to try to determine whether small urban reservoirs like Lake Aliso could serve as sources or as sinks for carbon, nutrients, and trace metals to the San Francisco Bay. And in today's talk, I'll be focusing on the metals specifically, the trace metals. There's a lot of data and there's just not enough time to talk about carbon and nutrients today, but I will focus on the metals. So I'd just like to define a couple of things here. So when I say that the reservoir, Lake Aliso, is a source to downstream areas such as the bay, that means that I'm saying that the amount or concentration of material coming out of the reservoir is greater than the amount that's coming in. So some of that is getting stored in the reservoir or in the sediments below it. On the other hand, the source is when it's flowing out of the reservoir. It's not being stored, sorry. And then on the other hand, a sink is when the amount that's coming into the reservoir is greater than the amount that's coming out, so that the reservoir is a sink for those materials, or they do not flow out. So in this study, we did look at a couple of other reservoirs in the East Bay as well, but today I'm, again, going to focus just on the Lake Aliso Lion Creek watershed. So another goal we had was to determine how efficient ephemeral reservoirs like Lake Aliso could be for sequestering or not sequestering these carbon, nutrients, and metals as compared to perennial reservoirs. So a perennial reservoir is always full. This picture I have of a perennial reservoir here is of, I think this is Lake Anza up in the Tilden Park in Berkeley. And then an ephemeral reservoir is sometimes full and it's sometimes empty. And those are the pictures showing Lake Aliso full. It's full in the summertime. And then when it is empty, when the stream is just running through in the wintertime. And again, ephemeral reservoirs can be natural, but in this case, Lake Aliso is ephemeral because it is a managed system. Finally, our third goal was to try to determine what the recent history of environmental impacts on East Bay watersheds is from sediment records from these different reservoirs. And this is a picture of some of my research students taking a core on the bottom of Lake Aliso in the wintertime when the lake was empty. And we use a device that allows us to get about a meter long core or so. And I'll show you that core a little bit later. Okay, so let's talk about Lake Aliso a little bit. So the lake is full in the summertime and it's empty in the wintertime. And the reason for this is because historically the campus used the water in the lake in the summertime for irrigation. And then in the wintertime, it was empty to allow for some flood control. So what happens is that the dam is closed at the end of the rainy season in the springtime, and then the lake is allowed to fill. So it holds water all summer long until the following late fall, early winter, right before the rains start, when the dam is opened and the creek empties again. And again, on this photo, you can see that Orange Creek flowing along the bottom of the empty Lake Aliso here. So here's our little watershed a little bit closer up. You can see that the watershed area, it's a lot smaller than Lake Merritt. It's about a quarter the size of the Lake Merritt watershed. And the surface area of the lake is a small fraction of Lake Merritt's. But you can see that this little watershed is impacted by many different factors. It is impacted by mine drainage, from runoff from suburbs, from runoff from freeways. Both the Highway 13 and Highway 580 run through the watershed. I should also mention that both Horseshoe Creek and Leona Creek are both tributaries to the main stem of Lion Creek. And you can see just below 580, you can see the campus where Lion Creek is actually daylighted. After it goes through that little blue bump, which is Lake Aliso, it's daylighted on campus until it goes back into a closed pipe under Seminary, and then goes all the way and flows to eventually to the bay. Okay, so we need to start our discussion by talking a bit about the Leona Heights sulfur mine. So early in the last century, sulfur was mined here out of pyrite, which contains both iron and sulfur. These photos I have here are the some photos of the mine tailings. This was before the site was remediated. The site was remediated in March 2015. Oops, sorry. My lights go out when I don't move. And then there was more remediation again after some heavy rains in 2016. So if you go up there now, it's all cleaned up and there is now grass growing on top of that mine tailings pile. I've also put a map here to show you the location of the mine site relative to Leona Creek, and then as the creek flows into the main stem of Lion Creek at that point, which is underground, and then comes out at it comes out again to be daylighted at Lake Aliso on the campus. So here I'm showing you a diagram to show you where our team was sampling for these different sites. So we do have some data that we took from as close as we could get to the mine site. And then we took data at the inlet to Lake Aliso, which you can see on the upper left. And then we measured data in Lake Aliso itself when the lake was present. And then we measured data again at the outlet coming out of the lake, because we were really interested in seeing what effect does the lake have on the creek. What happens? Does the chemistry change from the time the water comes into the lake at the inlet from when it goes out of the lake at the outlet? So that was one of our big, research goals that we talked about earlier. So what did we do out there? And what did all those students do? So here's some of the field methods that they used. This was data collection in situ. So they went out bi-monthly at the inlet, the outlet, the upstream site, and also in the reservoir. And they measured various typical water quality parameters like temperature and dissolved oxygen and conductivity and pH. And I am pretty sure that at Lake Merritt, there's a similar instrument that measures all of these items as well. So they used a probe to measure in situ all of those different water quality parameters. They also measured the water discharge at both the inlet and the outlet. So how much flow of water we got in volume per unit time. And those are a couple pictures of some students taking data. When we were out there, we also collected water samples, again, bi-monthly at the inlet, the outlet, and the reservoir. And we collected water samples so that later we could measure cations, which are positively charged ions, usually metals, like, for example, calcium and magnesium. And then we also took samples, so we could measure anions, which are negatively charged ions. And those are things like nitrate or sulfate. We know that there's, sulfate that's coming from upstream where the mine site was, because it was a pyrite mine, and sulfate is a component of, or a product of pyrite weathering. We also took water samples so that we could measure trace metals. And those are smaller metals that are generally in smaller concentrations, like maybe medium concentrations like iron, or lower concentrations like copper or zinc or nickel. And finally, we also measured total inorganic carbon and total organic carbon. And today I'm going to show you a little bit of cation data, but mostly I'm going to show you trace metal data. Okay, and here is a picture of the core that the students took that was recovered from Lake Aliso. And this core was taken when the lake was drained in the winter time, and you can see those really strong layers of orange layers and black layers. And we think that the orange layers are times when that iron-rich sediment dominated the deposits. And then the black layers, we think, are times when Lake Aliso itself, the organic matter in that lake, produced deposits. Okay, so then we took all those samples in the field, and then we came into the lab, and we measured lots of different things on lots of different instruments. For example, we measured the trace metals on an inductively coupled plasma mass spectrometer at UC Santa Cruz. And we measured the cations, and we measured phosphate here on campus at MCNU, Mills College at Northeastern University. We have a microwave plasma atomic emission spectrophotometer where the students can measure the cations. And then we have a neutral analyzer to measure phosphate. So the students really participated in this work. They made the standards, they did the measurements, they ran the instruments. Okay, so now that we've set all that up with our motivation, what our goals were of the study, what we did in the field and what we did in the lab, let's look at some data. So we have about 10 years of data, and I just chose one water year of in situ data to show for the lake. And this is temperature and oxygen for Lake Aliso for water year 2016. And so what you can see is that the temperature varies through the year. It generally gets warm at the surface and is slightly cooler at the bottom of the lake. And then you can also see that dissolved oxygen changes as well. It's generally high at the surface and lower at the bottom. And it turns out that the lake does become seasonally stratified in terms of temperature and dissolved oxygen. And it can go to very low oxygen in the late summer and early fall. And just as a note, in water year 2016, the dam was open, and so the lake was not there approximately from the end of January to the end of March. So there's no temperature or DO data for then because there was no lake then. Okay, now let's shift to looking at the creek data. So this is our temperature data over the approximately 10 years that we took data. And here across the bottom are the dates. And then on the y-axis, we see temperature. And we see seasonal changes in temperature. It's warm in the summer. It's cold in the winter. We see the highest temperatures at LC1, which is that upstream site. And that's probably because it's the sunniest of all the sites. And then in blue, we see the data from the inlet. So just as that water is coming out of the pipe and into the lake. And then the outlet once the water has gone through the lake. And so we also can see that generally in the winter, when the dam is open, the inlet and the outlet temperatures kind of collapse on each other, and they're kind of recording the same thing because it's just one creek together. This is our dissolved oxygen data. It's quite variable, but most of the time the sites are well oxygenated, especially at the inlet where the water flows out from a pipe, and so it's getting kind of turbated and aerated, and a lot of oxygen is added there. And the dissolved oxygen generally gets low in the summer and fall, and it's lower than the winter and spring for the most part. And sometimes during some of those drought years, the dissolved oxygen outlet values were much lower than the inlet because there was so little water in the stream at that time. The next graph I'm going to show you is specific conductance. So that tells us about how many ions or dissolved chemicals or dissolved metals are in the water. And so the first thing you might notice is that the conductance is a lot higher for the upstream site. So that makes sense. That's that material that's coming out of the former mine has a lot of dissolved constituents. And then you can see both the inlet and the outlet. Generally, the outlet's tracking the inlet. And again, they tend to collapse on each other during the winter time. And the variability is quite high. And you can see some of those spikes, which are way off the chart. And some of those spikes occurred at the inlet and the outlet even during those periods of remediation. So perhaps things were stirred up a bit and that flowed downstream, and or those could have been really big precipitation events. And remember, we went out sampling, bi-monthly, so twice a month, and we weren't necessarily hitting always big precipitation events. It was a regular sampling. So sometimes we caught precipitation events and sometimes we did not. Okay, and then finally for the time series data, this is pH. And you can see that the pH, or the acidity, the pH is much lower, meaning the acidity is much higher at LC1 at the mine site when the water first comes out of there. That's what we would expect from that. And then you can see that by the time the water gets down to Lake Aliso, to the inlet, the pH is much higher. It's more like a neutral 7. And that's due in part because the water is diluted. We're adding in water from the main stem of Lion Creek. And then also, as it's moving downstream and more water is added to it. But again, you can see that the pH did dip low a bit during, again, that remediation time period as well. Okay, this time series is showing the iron concentration data. So it's a pyrite mine, so we would expect iron to be a large constituent. These concentrations are in ppb. Iron isn't particularly bad for anyone, but it's just, it colors the water, it makes it look orange. In really high values, it's perhaps not good, but for the most part, it's pretty harmless. We can see that the inlet and the outlet values are highly variable. And we see that sometimes we see spikes in the inlet coming in, maybe in winter time when those precipitation events happen. And overall, we can see, there's on average not a lot of difference between the inlet and the outlet. And I'm going to show you a way to see this a little bit better next. So on this graph, what I've done is I made a box and whisker plot so that you can see that the bars are areas where, the concentrations are grouped by season. I should start with that. So the blue is the inlet during the wet season, and the orange is the outlet during the wet season. And the yellow is the inlet in the dry season, and the gray is the outlet in the dry season. So the bars show us kind of the middle 50% of the data, and we can see that they pretty much overlap each other. So for the most part, it doesn't really matter if you're looking at the inlet or the outlet, or if you're looking at the wet or the dry season, they're not significantly different from each other. They all kind of, hit about, about 50 ppb or so. So those values all overlap. So that's probably telling us that, there's not a huge strong seasonal signal with this, and there's not a huge effect of having the lake there either. Here I'm showing you, I said I was going to show you mostly trace metal data, but before I show you that, I just want to show you what some major cations look like. So these are major metals. These are calcium and magnesium. And here we see that these two pretty much, what they're showing is that in the wet season, we have a wider range in values. They can get a bit lower. That's because, these values are probably being diluted a bit by precipitation. And then for the dry season, the inlet and the outlet are just a little bit tighter and tend to be at the higher end of the range. So the inlet and the outlet look really pretty similar when they're in the same season. Okay, so probably the lake is also not having an effect on the concentrations of these major metals. They flow in the lake, they flow out, they're not really being affected by the lake. Okay, well now let's get to the exciting trace metal data. This is a time series data set of copper coming in from the inlet in blue and the outlet in orange. And we're showing seasonal cycles here with the inlet mostly higher than the outlet. Next, this one is showing you nickel. Here again, the blue, that inlet concentration is also mostly higher than the outlet. And finally, here's the manganese concentration, where again, for the most part, we see the blue concentrations, the inlet being higher than the outlet. And for example, we do see the lowest values in summer and fall and the highest values in winter and spring. So now we're going to look at this trace metal data, the copper, nickel, and manganese, the same way that we looked at the other data, the iron, and also the magnesium and calcium in these box and whisker plots. So here it is. So here, what we're seeing is a little bit different pattern than we saw with either of the other types of elements. And what we're seeing is that for copper, nickel, and manganese, the dry season outlet value, so the dry season again is when the lake is present, and that outlet value is much lower in concentration than any of the other values. So it seems like, at least in the summertime when the lake is there, that the lake is having an effect on the concentration of these trace elements, copper, nickel, and manganese, as when the water comes in as compared to when it comes out of the lake. So perhaps Lake Aliso is a sink for these metals. Okay, this data sheet, I'd like to show you guys just to talk through another aspect besides concentration. There's a lot going on here, so I'm going to just start at the top and kind of explain what's going on here. So on that top graph, the top two panels are from water year 2012. The bottom two panels are from water year 2016. And the top panel and the third panel down show you water discharge as we measured it at the inlet and the outlet. So how much water is coming in, how much water is coming out. And again, sometimes we hit a rainy season and sometimes we didn't. And then the second and fourth graphs show you how much iron, which is the scales on the left, and how much nickel, the scales on the right, is coming into and out of the lake. So generally what we're seeing here is that the inlet amounts for nickel, not just in concentration, but also in grams per day, are generally higher for the inlet than they are for the outlet in both water year 2012 and in water year 2016. Again, perhaps indicating that the lake is a sink for nickel in those times. It may even be a sink for the iron as well in 2016. So where is that going? If the lake is a sink for these metals, where does it go? Well, it probably has to go into the sediments, for example. These are some graphs showing us with depth in the core counts of metals. And so you can see that oscillation between high and low concentrations of metals. We think that those high concentrations are in those orange iron-rich layers, and the low concentrations are in those black organic-rich layers that we saw in the picture of the sediment core earlier. So what could be going on here? Well, we think that Lake Aliso could be a sink for copper, nickel, and manganese in the summer months when the lake is full. And we're throwing around some hypotheses right now, some possible explanations, which include perhaps the copper and the nickel is being bound to the organic matter, and it's not available in the spring and the summer when the algae is photosynthesizing and that organic matter is maybe taking up those trace metals, and or that they are adhering to those organic particles. Or perhaps some either manganese or copper is somehow becoming less soluble and is precipitating when the oxygen changes at the bottom of the lake. Copper, nickel, and manganese all have chemistry that's affected by whether there's oxygen or not. And different kinds or different ions of copper or nickel or manganese are soluble in sometimes in oxygenated waters and sometimes in non-oxygenated waters. So it may be that perhaps when the lake gets low in oxygen, that those can actually precipitate out and become non-soluble and be deposited. Okay, so if we think about what might account for Lake Aliso's behavior and what the potential management implications are, is that we know that it's seasonally stratified. And we think maybe these variable oxygen conditions, maybe even to anoxia, is maybe affecting these metals that have what we call redox behavior, which means that they are affected by the presence or absence of oxygen. It's also possible that the organic matter is sequestering some of these metals. And it could be also the fact that the nature of the lake, because it's ephemeral, that maybe we're demobilizing and then remobilizing those metals as the lake is filled and emptied and filled and emptied. And we also think that climate change, which is causing some of, related to the drought cycles, may intensify some of these changes. So we think that maybe summertime lake management, in addition to that transition to the winter time, might be, important times for the fate of these metals downstream. So with that, I will flash to my reference slide here and a lovely picture of lots of my students at another local creek, and add my acknowledgement side. Lots and lots of people to thank here. And I will, Katie, should I stop my share so we go to questions? How should we do this?
Yeah, let's stop share so we can we can and everybody so you can raise your hand and we can pull some questions out of chat. And wow, this is just a lot of research. What experience your students are getting from this. Let me
It's
check
many generations of students. Like we did this project over, a 10-year period. So that's, quite a few groups of students coming through.
Okay, I'm looking here. So let's see. Okay. Brittany, are you seeing the chat? And if anybody can see the chat, so um,
I can take a look at the chat too.
yeah. Okay, so I'm seeing says, let's see. I see the stuff from the trivia. So
I do.
I was wondering about you're really kind of tracing the dynamics of movement of substances down through the watershed. What are there any concerns for example about something like copper? I know it's a component of herbicides and so forth. Is it having a potentially detrimental? Are there concerns about detrimental effects of these things that are followed, or are they kind of like correlates that might give insight into the movement of some more familiar toxic stuff that might be going down the watershed?
Yeah, so it's possible. So we should be um concerned about, trace metals in natural waters. Copper and zinc, I understand, can be components of brake pads, for example. And,
Yeah.
the lake is downstream of some freeways and streets, and there's urban runoff and all of those pieces. Probably most of it's coming from the historical mine site. It could be there, it could be from the freeways, it could be from runoff. And yes, there are, certain levels above which, you don't want to go over for aquatic life. It seems like for most of the time, for most of the metals, it's okay at an okay level. Sometimes it goes a little bit too high. So yeah, we should be concerned. But I think, there's Lake Aliso and how that's affected. And then there's also, what goes downstream. So again, we would need to be aware of, for whatever the outlet is, whatever's coming out, what's flowing then downstream.
Yeah.
I guess.
We have a question here from Mark about Jewel Lake in Tilden. He notes that this seems to be similar to Lake Aliso in some ways. Are you aware of any similar studies that are being done at Jewel Lake?
So another lake that we looked at Lake Anza, which I think is slightly upstream of Jewel Lake in Tilden. And, we were looking at Anza as kind of a control because upstream of Lake Anza, there's not much development. It's in the park. Um, it doesn't have the historical mine factor. There aren't any freeways coming through there. So yeah, all the metal concentrations were much lower there. Jewel, I don't really know much about. I am sure that people are looking at it. I could, definitely look into that and find out for you about particularly Jewel. I Yeah, so and the data we got from Anza, is probably a few years old now. So I'm not really sure about the current situation there.
Yeah,
But it
that's
is a small, Jewel is very small, like Aliso is small.
yeah. Let's see. So taking a look here more. So there's let's see. Is Lake Aliso entirely man-made, or is there any indication of a longer history at Lake Aliso?
Yeah, so I am pretty sure that it is entirely man-made. My understanding is that when Susan and Cyrus Mills moved Mills College from Benicia to its present location in Oakland, that they dammed the creek then and made Lake Aliso to be a water source for the campus. But that is a good question as to whether or not that area had, maybe it was like a little wider part in the valley and perhaps some water accumulated there. That's a possibility too. That's a really great question.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Lake Aliso it was much bigger earlier, like that picture I showed you from 1920s, and often the Mill students used it for, they had lots of May Day celebrations there, and they did plays, and they had all kinds of, parties and things.
Yeah.
So the mine was in operation. My understanding, it was in operation in the early 1900s, and not for very long. I think it was completely done, by the 1920s or 20s or 30s or so, is my understanding.
Hmm. That color was really striking. So, let's see. And I was wondering, are students studying the biology of the reservoir as well, and for its use by birds and maybe some of the the other organisms, invertebrates and macroinvertebrates and so forth that might be in there.
Yes. So in the past, students have looked into life in Lake Aliso. And, every single day I am upset at myself for not measuring chlorophyll in the lake. Like we should have been doing that all along. So we could really definitively say what role, photosynthesis was playing. But there have been various studies through the years by students here about the biology in the lake, about, and everything. You're right, like birds, invertebrates, even microorganisms as well. So lots of that has been looked into. I am more of a geochemist and paleoceanographer, so I'm not the best person to ask about the biology, but I can definitely get back to you on that. But yes, there are living things in Lake Aliso. Yes.
It's a fascinating system that you have there to work with. Um, Christina, I wonder if you would mind. We're going to take a few moments as we end the hour to do our credits, and then we could come back for a few more minutes of discussion if people want to get their questions into the chat. We'd like to thank our supporters and so forth. So I'm going to do a quick screen share. And this will be about 5 minutes. We'll thank some of the people who make our programs at Rotary Nature Center Friends happen. So here we go. Okay, so again, welcome and thank you. This has been a really wonderful talk with somebody who's doing research and involving our young people in training and getting excited about science. So want to mention that Rotary Nature Center Friends at Lake Merritt is an independent, all-volunteer 501c3 nonprofit. We are not part of the Rotary Nature Center or any City of Oakland organization. We focus our activities on community science down at Lake Merritt primarily, and we look at plankton, we look at some water quality parameters and biodiversity. We are interested in and concerned about environmental justice, in particular, access to nature and getting involved in studying nature. So we build community and understanding of the natural world through a variety of activities, intergenerational activities, and just all kinds of work with the community, focusing on environment and impacts, especially on marginalized low-income parts of our community. We would like to thank some of the people who've been especially supportive in this past year. In particular, the New Voices Are Rising portion of the Rose Foundation. They have been supporting student interns at Lake Merritt now for quite a few years, and we really enjoy working with them and learning from them about environmental justice issues affecting people in Oakland and throughout San Francisco Bay. We want to also extend our great thanks to the Alameda County Clean Water Program, which provided funding for a recent project we've done at a tributary to Lake Merritt, that is Glen Echo Creek, which culminated in some planting of native plants. So thank you to all of the groups listed here. They've supported us in many ways over the past year. Just wanted to share a picture of the students from Oakland Technical High School we worked with for about 6 months, investigating nature at Oakland Park, which is on Glen Echo Creek. And we were looking at native plants and just the experience of being in nature and how interdependent things are in the city, even in the city. And so this project ended in the removal of invasive ivy and planting 50 native plant individuals, focusing on species that are culturally important to Ohlone people who are stewards of this land. So we're excited to learn from them and learn about taking care of plants and planting plants. I'd also like to thank our Water Justice Fellows from the Foundation, been working with us for number of years, and this is our current year's Water Justice Fellows collecting plankton. They've been involved in water quality testing with our multi-probe electronic instrument at Lake Merritt, similar to, but probably not as fancy as the one that Dr. Fall is using at Lake Elisa with so many parameters, but looking at some of the basic water quality parameters. We also would like to mention our urban estuaries California Naturalist certification course. We have our second cohort is going to start this October. If you are interested in joining us, please use the QR, go to our Eventbrite, and you can find out more details there about the course. We do We do provide scholarships. There are fees, but we are committed to including everyone in the community who is wanting to take this course. It's a significant course, 40 hours of natural history study, both on Zoom and in the field, but it's a lot of fun. We also want to thank the City of Oakland's K-Top TV channel for rebroadcasting all of our Lakeside chats. They rebroadcast on Sundays from 6 to 7 p.m. And you can go to the City of Oakland to find out how to tune in to the rebroadcasts. The first 2 weeks of the month are golden oldies from our list now of about 60 different programs, which you can also go to on YouTube and find programs about Lake Merritt and community, on almost any topic you're interested in. If you enjoy what we do, we'd like to encourage you to make a donation so that we can continue to provide education and the tools and so forth for our in-person and our virtual programs that we do. I want to thank you for coming, especially Dr. Fall, California Naturalist Urban Estuaries course graduates who help us a lot with our in-person activities. The mentioned externs from Rose Foundation, Alameda County Clean Water Program, the Breakfast Club, the Lake Merritt Boating Center, Lake Merritt Institute, Public Works, Measure DD, and all of Oakland. We appreciate you. We are going to take a look at what's coming up next quickly. So in June, we are going to have a special Lakeside chat about the crows and corvids with Adrian Cotter. He is a naturalist, an artist. He designed many of the banners that are at Lake Merritt for the refuge. And he's on the Measure DD Community Coalition Agenda Committee. And he's part of the Lake Merritt Observatory and Underwater Observatory. So he's spent a lot of time hanging out at Lake Merritt, and it will have a lot to tell us about his special interest in crows. On July 10th, we are going to be hearing from Corina Gould from the Confederated Villages of LaShawn and talk about rematriating the land in 2026. So we really look forward to that one. As I mentioned before, we do plankton monitoring. You're welcome to drop by the Junior Center for Art and Science. We have 2 ongoing iNaturalist Bio Blitz programs. They're all kind of under the same umbrella now on iNaturalist, and we encourage and enjoy working with people collecting iNaturalist and observations. So that brings us pretty much to the end. We want to thank everyone for being here. Rotary Nature Center friends are primary stewards of Lake Merritt Wildlife Refuge. We regularly host school groups, members of the general population at Lake Merritt for bird watching, nature walks, native plant identification and planting and weeding, and testing the water. And we invite you to come on out and contact us and see if there's something you'd like to do with us in the coming months and year. So with that, I am going to stop my share. And again, thank you so much for being here. And let's see. David has a question. And he says he wanted to thank the speaker for the Leona site references. So Christina, can we share the references that you in your slides as a post-chat resource for people?
Sure, yeah.
That would be great. So we'll be sure to do that. Great talk. Nice to see how the higher slopes might be applicable to Lake Merritt. So I know that it's really great to have such a fine-grained and long-term study of the movement of trace metals and other things that might be associated with them in the watershed. What are the primary pollutants, Jonathan asks, that we should mainly worry about in our watershed?
Oh, it's a question for me. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Um,
Yes.
yeah. So I think, I think we should be concerned about excess nutrients. I think we should be concerned about things like, excess nitrates, and phosphates that might cause algal blooms. I think that's one thing we might be concerned about. I do think we want to be aware of levels of some trace metals can be harmful, and so we do want to be aware of that, I think. Um, there are some, new and emerging pollutants that
Mm.
are coming out as well. And maybe, starting to look at some of those, byproducts of industry and plastic making and all those uh, emerging pollutants might be of concern. And perhaps also biological oxygen demanding waste might be also maybe a concern. That's taking away oxygen if there's excess organic matter, perhaps. That's maybe less concerning, but um, I think those are the top ones. Lead, arsenic. I mean, those aren't. If
Oh,
there were there, that those would be issues. Yeah, things like that.
did you test for those at all?
Um, it's very hard to test for those because they are in very low concentrations, and it's also really hard um, to make sure that you're doing clean enough techniques that you're getting those.
Uh,
So we tried, but I would say, I wouldn't. It's hard. It's hard to measure those really well.
yeah, thank you. So just wanted to know that you got a shout out from one of the students from Oakland Tech, and it looks like your son said, "Good job, Mom." And that really was very interesting, and really appreciate your all this information and just energizing students to be out there um, in the field. At Lake Merritt, we've been kind of wondering about what's at the bottom. We're wondering about
Hmm.
how hard it is to do a core.
Well, we should talk about that. That
Let's
would be
do.
fun.
Oh yeah, let's do it. Because there are so many people who so it turned out there was a fairly they're on to trying to trace nitrates
Hmm.
as possible contributors to algae blooms.
Hmm.
That said, when we look at algae blooms in Lake Merritt, they're very intermittent. They change a lot. And they come and then they go. That one in 2022 was a real outlier. And it came from Alameda. It came from the Bay. It did not come from Oakland,
Hmm.
from the Lake Merritt. It was a particular um, phytoplankton that just got out of control and came in, as you probably know. Anyway, but so it didn't seem to be related so much to nitrates in Lake Merritt, and the study from the water boards that recently said that the nitrates and the nutrients were similar to what is in the bay. It's
Hmm.
nitrogen limited in Lake Merritt, but there are a lot of people who feel like there's really something down there in that mud. And it would be really fun to be able to do a core and maybe look for some of the things that might be there. Such a history of the mud of Lake Merritt. But that would be fun.
Yeah.
Well, we should talk about that then. Well, I want to thank everybody for being here. And we're getting close to our usual time where we where we say goodnight. But if you have any lingering questions, please send them to me and I will forward them to Dr. Fall. And we will prepare a post chat email to everybody in the next few days just to wrap up some of the references and thoughts and things that have come out of this discussion. And we really appreciate everybody contributing to the trash, to the chat, and contributing to the trivia and having fun with us tonight. So thank you so much, Dr. Fall. Let's all give her a round of applause. Everybody, you can say, yeah, we can even use our react buttons. That's kind of fun. I'm going to do that. Yes, we have whatever. Oh, there we go. Yes, thank you again so much. This was really special and so nice
Well,
that
thank
you're
you so much for having me.
okay.
So much fun.
It was great. So let's so then I think if we're ready, let's all have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. It's gorgeous weather. Be safe and keep your questions coming. And we will be back again in about a month to hear some more interesting information and talk from somebody who loves the environment and wants to put science and stewardship and enjoyment together. It can't have a better combination. So thank you again so much, everybody.